You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Weather Watch on Germantown Municipal Television. I'm your host, Finnegan Gruggett, a student at Houston High School in Germantown, Tennessee. On Weather Watch, we will talk to different agencies that are impacted by extreme weather. We'll kick off the show with Jim Bellus, the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service in Memphis. Thank you for joining me, Jim.
Finnegan, it's great to be here.
So as we start off the show, could you explain your day-to-day responsibilities at the National Weather Service?
Well, the National Weather Service is a federal agency, actually, and it's part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We have about 122 offices actually spread across the United States and the territories. We have a number of national centers. Some of your people might be familiar with the National Hurricane Center, for instance, or the Storm Prediction Center. But we also have an Aviation Weather Center, an Ocean Prediction Center, actually a Space Weather Center. So it's really a large group of folks that are spread across our country, focused on the protection of life and property and enhancing the national economy. And here in the Memphis area, we're not just the Weather Service, or the office that we have here at the Agri Center is not just the Weather Service for Memphis itself, but we actually have parts of 4 states that we serve and 57 counties, from the Boot Heel, West Tennessee, most of East Arkansas, and North Mississippi.
So since you cover that large of an area, how is it possible to cover such a wide area?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not always easy, and certainly weather forecasting has improved a lot, and we still have a lot of improvements to make, but technology is really the bottom line, Finnegan. I mean, we could not do that without the ability to have radar, which covers that distance. Also, satellite is very helpful. We have a number of surface observing systems that we have across the region that we utilize. And of course, even average citizens who are feeding us with data, weather observations, or giving us reports of severe weather when it occurs.
So what's the main goal of the National Weather Service?
Without question, we are providing environmental information, really weather forecasts, that people use to make decisions. And they make decisions that on one level enhance their economic well-being. If I could tell you that a storm was coming, maybe it's as easy as, hey, I'm going to put the car in the garage so it doesn't get hailed on. That's a decision that you're making based off the information that we send. Someone might decide whether or not, as a contractor, they could go out and do outdoor work today. Is it going to rain today? Another perhaps more important in terms of life-saving type of service that we provide is, of course, with tornado warnings, winter storm warnings, hydrologic warnings, river flood warnings, or flash flood warnings. This is a question of alerting people so that they can take action to save their life.
Since you're talking about watches and warnings, what's the main difference between the two?
A watch is really to alert people to the potential of a particular weather phenomenon. For instance, let's talk about a winter storm. If we say there is a winter storm watch, what we're saying is the potential is there. Not every time when we forecast a winter storm watch does it necessarily lead to the event. But we're seeing the potential perhaps several days in advance, and we're wanting to alert you to that possibility. Same thing is true in a tornado. Tornado watch means conditions are favorable. That doesn't mean we've spotted a tornado. That doesn't mean that radar is indicating a tornado at that time necessarily. But what it means is that the potential over a particular area, over a several-hour period at least, there is the possibility of tornadoes.
So since we're talking about watches and warnings, on average, what's the lead time when you issue a watch or a warning, what's the difference between the timing?
Well, for a watch, typically, particularly if it's a winter storm, I think our goal really is to try to get at least a day, sometimes 2 days in advance of the event itself. If it's a tornado watch or severe thunderstorm watch, we try to get that out several hours in advance so that you're at least aware of the potential of what's going on. In terms of a warning for winter storms, ideally we want to give people certainly more than 12 hours if at all possible. Tornadoes, hey, we're wanting to give you 15 minutes or more. So again, a watch means potential. Warning means that the condition is either imminent or occurring.
And what are some of the different things you look at when issuing a watch or, say, a warning?
One of the things that we rely significantly on, as I mentioned earlier, of course, satellite, radar, surface observations of temperature and moisture and wind. But one of the things that, as meteorologists, we really utilize quite significantly, it's particularly important as you go several days in advance, are computer models. And the computer models are simulations of the atmosphere that we use. They are, and this could get technical in terms of a science, meteorology is a science, and so what we try to do is we model the air. We try to predict where the airflow is going to be several days in advance. Most of us are familiar with the term the jet stream. What is the jet stream going to be doing in 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to, in our case, we forecast 7 days. Knowing where those ripples are and where the speeds are and the like are very important for us in terms of formulating a forecast.
So these severe thunderstorm watches and tornado watches, does your office issue those, or is there a national agency that issues the watches?
This is where we work together with our national centers at the watch phase. Particularly for tornado, severe thunderstorm watches. We work with the Storm Prediction Center. Officially, the Storm Prediction Center will issue the watch. Oftentimes, that's certainly in collaboration with the local office, but they are monitoring that program and issue those watches. The warning phase is really up to the local the local forecast office, like Memphis, where we are responsible for issuing the warnings to get out that life-saving information to the public.
We have about a minute left, but what's the main difference between the National Weather Service and, say, the weather departments and news stations?
The biggest difference, of course, as I mentioned initially, we're a government agency, and so taxpayers are investing in our agency specifically for this life-saving information and general information and data that can help them enhance their economic well-being. A television station is purely a private entity. The reason why television stations have weather largely is because it brings an audience. People are interested in the weather, and so they're listening to it. That's why it's important. So one is a private entity, the other is public, and we actually work together because it's our responsibility to, as a private entity, to help them and enhance what they're doing to get the message out to the public.
I think that's a great place to take a break. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back in a minute to talk more with Jim Bellus. Please stay with us.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Welcome back. I'm Finnegan Gruggett, and you're viewing Weather Watch. With us today discussing the different types of extreme weather is Jim Bellus of the National Weather Service in Memphis. So often here in Memphis, we deal with severe weather. What's the main months we usually see severe weather here in the Memphis area?
Well, I like to think that, living in this part of the country, it kind of gives us a little bit of the Super Bowl of weather, if you will. We see a little bit of everything. We see winter storms here. We see extreme heat. We can certainly see extreme cold too, and of course tornadoes and flash floods. The main time of year, of course, for severe weather typically is the springtime. Typically from late March or during the month of March through the month of May is a peak time. We also have a secondary peak time, usually in November into about mid-December, where we can get another period of severe weather. The reality is, though, really any month of the year we can experience severe weather here in the Mid-South. Winter time, obviously, we're not as cold as some of the northern sites where we don't compare to a place like Chicago, but we get winter weather here. We get ice, we get significant snowfall, and certainly any time from December into March, we can get significant winter weather to occur.
Is there a specific reason why we see severe weather mainly in the spring and then in the later part of fall? Is there any specific reason?
There really is. It's, so much of severe weather is about the battleground between air masses, cold and warm. And at those transitional seasons, spring and then, of course, in the fall, is where you have those battlegrounds that are the most obvious and the most dramatic. Temperature contrasts that are the greatest. And so those are why those two times of the year really stick out.
So do weather patterns like El Nino and La Nina affect the weather here in Memphis? And if you could explain the difference between the two?
They can have a significant impact on our weather. In fact, I'll use an example. As we're having this discussion, we're going through a winter season of one of the strongest El Ninos ever. And what ended up happening over much of the eastern two-thirds of the country was we had one of the warmest Decembers that we ever had. That's not exclusively due to El Nino, but largely due to El Nino. And El Nino being warm sea surface temperatures in the Pacific, and you may say, why does that have any influence on our weather? But you have to think of our globe and our world as oceans and air and land interacting. And so that warm sea surface temperature out in the Pacific can have influences on the jet stream in our part of the country. And it conspired to give us very warm temperatures in December, and it resulted toward the end of the month in deadly tornadoes that occurred in the region.
And since you're talking about those tornadoes, you rate the National Weather Service rather rates these tornadoes on the EF scale. Could you explain what the EF scale is and the difference between the different types?
Be glad to. The EF scale is really maturing of a scale that was originally developed by Dr. Theodore Fujita from the University of Chicago a number of decades ago. And it was been about, let's say about 10 years ago or so, 8 years ago, where we enhanced or upgraded that scale, and now we call it the Enhanced Fujita scale. And it goes from EF0, which is the weakest, to EF5, which would be the strongest tornadoes that we see in observation in our country. So when a tornado occurs, we go out, we survey it, we try to quantify based on the degree of damage that occurs to various objects and try to make a correlation to what the wind speed and strength of that tornado was.
So when you go out to survey the damage path, what specific things are you looking for in terms of damage to rate the tornado?
Well, one of the things that we want to do is we want to go out and view an object that we have good information about in terms of if this object is damaged to a certain degree, we can correlate what the wind is. So we go to what are called damage indicators. A house could be a damage indicator. A trailer could be a damage indicator. An apartment complex, these types of things. We go there and we examine the degree of damage that occurred to that object. Now, one of the things that makes the scale a bit subjective is we need to really dig down into the quality of the construction, the integrity of the construction. A very well-built home is going to be able to withstand things much more so than one where the foundation is weaker. And so we need to, when we do our surveys, dig right down to those levels to see how well constructed the building was, and then from that we come up with a rating.
So let's switch gears now and talk about the Mississippi River. We often see flooding from the Mississippi River. How does that flooding impact the farming industry here in Memphis?
Well, I'll tell you, can have some significant impacts. And first and foremost, the mighty Mississippi, when it comes down into our region, is rather large. We have the confluence, of course, of the upper Mississippi River, which most people are aware, starts in Minnesota and flows through, the Quad Cities in Illinois and Iowa down through St. Louis, and of course comes to the confluence of the Ohio, which is draining as far away as even parts of southwestern New York State. So this is a huge drainage area, not to mention the fact that the Missouri River comes in as well. So you have a humongous area that is draining, all flowing through Memphis, Tennessee. And thankfully, through the work of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, much of our area has levees attached to it. However, there are parts of West Tennessee that are not leveed, and when we have floods in the summer like we had last summer, agricultural damage can be very significant to those areas that do not have levees in them.
We have about a minute left, but could you explain how do you guys know how high the river is? Do you have any specific instruments in the river?
We do. We have river gauges that are positioned across the Mississippi River, and in fact, people can go online and view what those levels are, and those levels correlate to different types of inundation that is across the area. A certain level on the Memphis gauge, by the way, indicates where water level could be in a particular location, if it's threatening or not. So yes, we have river gauges, and that data is always accessible.
I think that's a great place to take a break. We'll be back right after this quick break. Please stay with us.
Preventing wildfires. That's all Smokey wants for his 70th birthday.
Don't worry. The 74 people were picked before me in the NFL draft.
To fight childhood obesity, United Way and the NFL are helping kids play at least 60 minutes a day.
Okay, time for the team obstacle course. Yay!
What this place needs is more healthy kids. To get involved or donate, go to unitedway.org/play60.
Now I get it.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Welcome back. I'm Finnegan Gruggett, and you're tuned in to Weather Watch. We want to spend our last moments talking about storm readiness with Jim Bellus of the National Weather Service in Memphis. So you guys often say families should be prepared for severe weather. What are some common tips you would recommend to prepare for severe weather?
Well, and I'm glad we're talking about this, because preparedness is really a vital aspect of survival, quite frankly. Do you know what to do when a tornado warning is issued? Where do you go? Hopefully, and what we encourage is that people have a plan ahead of time. If they're at home, going into an interior room away from windows is a must. If they're at their church or their school, where in the building or even a place of business, where should I go to shelter if a tornado warning is issued? Certainly, first and foremost, everybody should have access to that information so that if a warning was issued, they would get notification that they were in harm's way. For winter storms, certainly. What is the protocol for people? How should they take into effect? How would they know if a winter storm was coming? Those things are extremely important that people should plan ahead. What should they put in their car if they are traveling in a winter storm? Especially for those folks that might be driving to the north in Chicago. You get into blizzards at this during the winter season that could be life-threatening. When I was living in the northern portion of the country, you had a winter survival kit that you put in your car in case you were stranded. So we definitely want to make sure that people understand that there are preparedness tips that they need to engage in. One other thing before we have other discussions about preparedness is that it is amazing and it is very surprising that most people in floods who perish do so in their automobile. And it's simply because they're driving into water and they perceive it to be a lot more shallow than it is. And that's why we have the phrase, turn around, don't drown. Do not drive into water. It is a tragic situation.
You were talking about survival kits. Is there any big difference between preparing for, say, a winter storm or a possible severe weather event?
It is different. And if it's a winter storm, certainly particularly if it's an ice storm, preparation in case the power is going to be out on an extended period of time. Certainly one of the things that conspires, unfortunately, where people lose their lives is they bring in heating sources if their power is out, and in carbon monoxide poisoning. Certainly you have to be very, very cautious of that. Also, getting out too quickly when there's still ice on the limbs. Limbs fall, and unfortunately you have to be taking precaution for that. In terms of tornadoes, it's all about sheltering. It's all about being able to shelter in a reinforced structure, whether it's in the interior home or in a tornado shelter that many people have in our region.
So can businesses or, let's say, airports become storm ready? Is there a program out there that offers that type of readiness?
Yeah, what you're talking about, Finnegan, is a program that the National Weather Service has called Storm Ready, and what we've done with that program is we've kind of put together the prescription for preparing a business, a community, a county, and it takes a look at a number of different aspects of one's preparedness, from the ability to receive weather information, to disseminate the warnings to their people, whether it's at their business or in their community, their ability to communicate back and forth. So we provide them with guidance, and then what they do is they come up to that guidance and we provide a certification for them, a Storm Ready certification.
So how often do you guys make sure they're up to those standards? Is there a monthly check or something like that?
Well, when you go through the process, it is rather involved, whether you're becoming a Storm Ready community or certified as a Storm Ready community or a Storm Ready supporter. And a Storm Ready supporter might be a university, for instance. It could be an auditorium or a stadium. About every 3 years, we revisit that criteria and make sure that we're compliant. And then usually 3 years after that, we'll go through it all over again and do a site visit and do a thorough, because things can change and we want to make sure everything is refreshed.
Are there any specific things you look for when you make those visits? Say, do you look for if they have tornado shelters or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, those things are a plus, especially, where do you put people for sheltering? Do you have a plan in place? So if there's for instance, if it's a business, where does everybody go if a tornado warning is issued? Do you have the mechanism to receive that tornado warning? Do you have a way in which to broadcast that tornado warning to the people that are at this auditorium or business, et cetera, or school? Those are the aspects that we're looking at.
So if an everyday citizen wanted to get involved, do you guys offer any programs to become a weather spotter or things like that?
We do, and one of the things, a very long-standing and highly successful program that we've had for many, many decades is the Skywarn program. And so citizens are able to get involved in our warning process by simply going to one of these classes, and we usually do a couple of them here in Shelby County each year, where folks can come, of course, free of charge, and go through a session and get tapped in and let us know if they see severe weather occurring. They can report that to us.
So what are some of the things you talk about in the Storm Ready program, or the Weather Spotter program?
In the Skywarn? Yes. Well, certainly we do cover a bit of safety, because that's always first and foremost. But we look at the cloud features, which are indicative of severe weather, and we try to teach folks what those cloud features are. We go over reporting. What should you report? What are we interested in? And just give folks a familiarization with severe weather in general, what needs to be reported, and how to spot that.
So technology has evolved. We have about a minute left, but technology has evolved over the past couple of years. How has social media impacted the warning process?
Social media is incredible, the amount of reports that we get. We get pictures, we get all different kinds of things over social media. So it's a great benefit to us in our warning decisions.
I appreciate all the information, and I would like to thank you for coming on to the show. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. I'd like to thank Jim Bellus for taking the time out of his day to be on our show. If you'd like to learn more about this show or simply watch more of our programs, please visit www.gmtvonline.org. Until next time, this is Finnegan Gruggett with Weather Watch. See you next month.